we're all on a lot of the same stuff. But the big differences here, and we'll look at Cobble's here. Cobble, you're on Red Elemental Blast, Mental Misstep, and Snap, and you're the only I didn't left out Mental Misstep. Jesus Christ.
Did I leave out Misstep? Oops.
Jesus. I feel real. People in the comments are going to look at us like, "What are you doing this?"
Yeah. To be fair, historically, if there is a spell in the counterspell suite that I will forget, it has always been Mental Misstep. I do not why. It is my Mental Misstep.
Wow.
And welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast. I am your host, Callahan, and we do have a great show lined up for you all today. But before we get into it, I just want to thank you all for joining us this week. If you like this episode or any of our other episodes, please make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below if you're on YouTube. If you want access to our Discord server, where all three of us today are hanging out most of the time, go ahead and head on over to our Patreon, where you can go and support us. You'll get access to the Discord server. The link is down in the description. It's also patreon.com/The Mind Sculptors. One last thing, if you want to pick up any of the cards we're talking about today, you can head on over to our TCG Player affiliate link and use that to pick up some cards, and that will also help support the show, stuff like the MLC, all that stuff. Today, we are joined by Cobblepott again, and Cobble, we're doing a Brewer's Choice episode again. Pretty exciting for this one.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Our special guest is one of notoriety within the CEDH
I would
community.
Notoriety is an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah.
So the notorious IAN is joining us today. Our good friend Ian from ComedIan MTG. How's it going, Ian?
Good. Thank you for having me on. I always am excited to talk about brewing some spicy stuff. So let's get into it.
I'm excited to finally actually work on a project with you that's not me interviewing you for the MLC.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like we had many discussions before the MLC winner podcast where we were like, hey, we both enjoy talking. Can we work together?
We should do something. This is the first time we're doing it in a chiller sense. Yeah. So today we're doing a Brewer's Choice episode, like we said. And last time we did this with a different Ian. We did Zur. And for this one, we're doing another Blue-White X commander, but this time we're doing with partners. And it's Malcolm and Bruse Tarl. And this idea was actually brought to us by Ian to brew around these two. And so, Ian, what was your kind of thoughts around why you wanted to brew around Malcolm and Bruse originally?
For sure. So the idea was kind of a few parts. The basic concept behind it was I knew about brews with Malcolm plus red plus second color. And so we have the Malcolm Vial Smasher list, obviously very powerful Grixis option with a 2-card combo finish in Glenhorn and Buccaneer. We have the Malcolm Tana list, right, which is obviously all about neoforming stuff into your Glenhorn Buccaneer. And that's the Teamer variant. And so I was I'd heard about sort of the Stacks Bruse Malcolm list before, but I hadn't really seen that pick up a lot of steam. And I was like, well, no one's talking about the Jeskai variant. So figured it'd be kind of fun to explore that space.
And it's interesting because we talked about I'm kind of excited to do this because this gave me an opportunity to get up on a soapbox.
No.
Oh boy.
Well, if you remember in our
cue the Lavinia conversation.
Actually, I didn't put Lavinia in this list. If you paid attention when we go down through the cards, I intentionally did not play Lavinia in this. But this one of the things we talked about when we were doing our tier list with Ryan was that I think people played Jeskai kind of in general wrong. If you look at Jeskai in a lot of different formats, it's usually the best control deck, right?
Sure.
Sure. And so when we get into it, you'll kind of see my take on it. But I've always looked at these decks and gone, well, why are we trying to storm off? Why aren't we playing this? And so I've hung out with Charles too much, but I definitely, this is a blue-white, then very small red deck for me.
Sure.
And I'm really excited to talk about this list.
Kind of going off that point, I think it's really interesting because when I first started playing CEDH and like not even like a tournament level per se, but you know what I mean, like the paid side events in Command Fest, stuff like that, where they had those like mini 3-round CEDH like tournaments. The list that I was performing best with was always Elsha back when it was a mid-range deck. So this was before Underworld Breach was printed, when it was playing cards like Rest in Peace in the main board, and like it had its obviously like Storm quote by quote finish, but it was like it was a deck where you would just like land your Elsha and like throw 8 or 9 counter spells on top of your opponents while also cantripping in between each one. And it was like that was where I felt the deck had the best play patterns, was when it was the Jeskai sort of like mid-range control option.
Yeah, and I feel like now it kind of got like shoved into, now I know you help on the deck, but I feel like the breach lines, in my opinion, I don't think it serves to the play pattern very well.
It's a very different deck. I don't, when I sort of support the brewing on that deck right now, I support the direction that the community goes in with it when I tend to brew around that option, but I definitely have had my disagreements with certain packages.
If I was brewing like Elsha, I would be leaning into Rip for sure, but I wouldn't be playing Breach. But that's a whole different topic. I could talk all day about win conless control and all this stuff. But anyway, and Cobble brought a really cool list too. So Cobble went like full what's that that like villain in Marvel that just had a TV show, MODOK, on the naming of his deck, and it's MAGDA. And so what does that stand for, Cobble?
That stands for Make Artifact Game Plans Degenerate Again.
Hell yeah.
Which is a tongue-in-cheek reference to Magda and nothing else.
Literally nothing else.
Right.
Well, let's take a look at some of these lists. So we're going to start off and look at Ian's list here. And all three of our lists are very different. I'm really excited about this. So when we look at your Jeskai deck, you called it Malcolm. What's kind of the high level game plan for this list? What's it trying to do?
Sure. So as we mentioned, it's kind of that Jeskai mid-range value sense, right? So you're trying to use Malcolm and the fact that you have access to some pretty clean win lines in like 1 or 2 card combos in Jeskai. So for example, and I guess this might blend like our next point together, but the fact that, you know, you have access to Pyre of Heroes to turn any 2-drop pirate into your Glinthorn Buccaneer, the fact that you have access to Imperial Recruiter to like go grab your Glinthorn, and I'm also playing the Spellseeker lines in this deck that will basically turn Spellseeker into a 1-card 6-mana combo. So you have access to a lot of really easy, you know, quote 1-card combos. Bruce is mainly there for the colors, I will say, but the inspiration for this deck was me thinking about intuition. And I was thinking, you know, sometimes when you have intuition and you're playing an Underworld Breach deck, you will have that scenario where you go get intuition, you get LED, and you'll use intuition to get LED, Underworld Breach, and Savine's Reclamation. But you still won't have a brain freeze. Now, there's a lot of times where you'll have enough cards in graveyard to go recast that intuition and obviously get the cards that you need. But there's some times where you're really tight on the graveyard. So for this, I got really excited about this idea that you can cast an intuition, put Savine's, LED, and Glinthorn Buccaneer in your graveyard. And then suddenly you have just the I win pile with Malcolm on the battlefield. So that's kind of the basis behind this deck, and then the other stuff kind of got added on as time goes. And then apart from that, it's sort of this like mid-range, make a bunch of mana with Malcolm, use the fact that Malcolm has evasion, and occasionally use the fact that Bruse can give Malcolm double strike to get a lot of value.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. I like it was about halfway through brewing this. I was like, why are we doing this with Bruse, not Akiri? And then it like dawned on me, and I was like, oh, okay. I was like, that's why.
It's a significant difference, not only because of the number of treasures, but the life gain is not insignificant.
For sure.
Especially when you're playing a mid-range game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's interesting because we're all kind of made these decisions to play mid-range, and then I just said only mid-range. I'm playing Jeskai Stoneblade. So the way that I built this is to a lot of kind of what I looked at was what modern Stoneblade lists are doing, and kind of looked at, okay, I think there are some levels of like they play this many counterspell slots. So I tried to have that many counterspells. I tried to have that much interaction. I tried to have that much, like proportionally speaking, the same Stoneblade package size relatively. And obviously I kind of tweaked things where it went along, but this is part of like a new brewing practice that I'm taking of trying to take heuristics from other formats and seeing, like, translating them to CEDH, because my experience has been they do translate better than you think they do. And so, like, if you look at this list, I play pretty close to like almost 20 like counter spells almost. I play like about as many as you possibly can. I'm playing a pretty wide suite of interaction, playing a card that I think like every white deck should be playing, which is Winds of Abandon. And we'll talk about this more in a bit, but my deck is very much in the you hate everything that's going on in the meta, and then you add in with the fact that you have you have an evasive beater in the zone, you have Bruse that just can give it double strike, and really lean into the fact I also added 2 of the swords. So you can kind of double up on sword triggers. There's a lot of cool stuff that you can do that, which we'll get into. But my kind of take on it is let's play control. Because like I said, I think Jeskai's best served in kind of a control mid-range shell.
And it really can't be underestimated, the speed, especially when you have like either A, a mana crypt, or B, a jeweled lotus, to like have Malcolm and get your game plan going as soon as the first turn. Like every time you see that happen with Najila, it's obviously like a different thing because Najila is just right there on the battlefield. But when you can do that with one of your partners and just have it there, get your game plan going, start accruing value right away, especially when you want to, play a control-ish deck and have the advantage going forward like that, it's pretty interesting.
Well, and this is like one of the best shells, in my opinion, for a control, like Jeskai control shell, because you can just do combat damage. You can just control the game. You can do all those things. But then you also can just fall back on the fact that you have a 2-card combo that's with half of it in the command zone. So
which is really
clean. Real clean. And it's probably the closest non-blue black decks are going to get to like Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation, honestly.
Yeah, true.
So Cobble, when we look at yours, excuse my voice just there. When we look at yours, you are also playing a pretty mid-rangey game plan, but you're also doing things a little bit differently. So explain to us what's going on in this deck. Like you said, we're wanting to make artifact decks degenerate again.
Right. So this is leaning much heavily into Magda, in addition to the straight lines that you would normally expect from Malcolm. So it's doing the Glinthorn Buccaneer lines, and that stuff is expected, but it's not putting kind of all of the eggs in that basket and everything else is interaction.
Right.
The idea is to be able to pivot and be able to move in different directions depending on what's happening at the table. And at any point, you can always drop Glinthorn Buccaneer, but there's also this complete other set of lines. And I mean, the main one, with Magda, if you've got enough treasures, you just win right away. Or even if you just have 5 treasures, just being able to say, I'm going to spend 2 red mana and put Niv Mizzet onto the battlefield.
Yep.
That is the mid-rangiest of mid-range plays that you can do.
For sure.
So it's just very flexible.
Yeah.
And being able to zig when your opponents think that you're going to zag is definitely useful. The Magda stuff, you can do a lot of it without any casting of spells. So
true.
The nemesis of Jeskai decks is Rule of Law. And if you look at really all of the established Jeskai lists, whether it's Kaikar or Elsha whatever, all of them just kind of depend on the commander and fold to a Rule of Law. So I wanted to try to have at least some set of lines that could be executed through the Rule of Law until you are able to find something to free up the space to be able to do something different.
I will say that is something very interesting, is that I think all 3 of our lists all subvert that normalcy of not being able to play under Rule of Law. I think all 3 of our lists are actually very comfortable in that space.
I had a Rule of Law in it originally, but this is a conversation we've had before, Ian. I just don't like playing with Rule of Law, especially when I'm playing controlling decks, because
for sure,
I feel like I get punished for making a mistake way harder if I have a Rule of Law out than if I don't, where I can just sort of compensate for it. Yeah, it's very funny because Rule of Law was absolutely in the first draft of this deck, and part of my thought was similar to yours. Was I wanted to be able to utilize Rule of Law and have like this because Glinthorn gets there through a Rule of Law. But the issue I kept coming up with was that there's just your tutor suite is so bad.
Oh, it's pretty
garbage.
So like
it was just to this point where I'm like, I just think it's better to just focus on beating people in the face and then drawing into this. Magda's really interesting, and I will definitely talk about that some more. But kind of looking at the next part of it is obviously what are the win cons? So Ian, what are some of the win cons for this list? What are you doing to close out the game?
Sure. So I sort of did foreshadow this previously, but we have a number of lines to get to the Glinthorn plan. The Pyre of Heroes line is definitely there. I have a number of 2-drop pirates that's just basically makes it so you have Magda, you use the Pyre of Heroes to pop your 2-drop into your Glinthorn. Go from there. That's a combo. I am also playing Magda Niv Mizzet lines.
I see that. You both are.
And with those, I am also playing Curiosity and Ophidian Eye. Now, this comes from me playing Malcolm Vial Smasher a lot for an extended period of time when I had that deck on the database until the Hull Breacher incident. But I was playing Curiosity, even though that was like a Grixis turbo deck, because of just how efficiently I felt it played with Malcolm in the command zone. So that's why Curious Obsession's in there on top of Curiosity, because I feel like 1 mana, make your Malcolm now give you a mana and a card every time you hit somebody. It's just like really easy to underestimate how effective that is. And then I was like, you know what? Also, I'm going to have this. It's super easy to be playing this deck and make treasures. I have a ton of pirates, especially because I'm playing extra pirates to go for this treasure synergy. So I figured Magda, get me a Niv Mizzet, and then sometimes, worst case scenario, these curiosity effects are drawing me cards. Best case scenario, they're winning with Niv Mizzet. I'm playing Underworld Breach, LED. and Brain Freeze, and LED is nice because it layers with the Intuition package that I talked about earlier. And I'm also playing, as I mentioned, Spellseeker lines. So I believe this can be originally attributed to Alton, the creator of 4-Color Evolution. So there's a Spellseeker line in which you go grab Ephemerate, you cast that Ephemerate on your Spellseeker, right? So now we're looking at 2 generic, a blue and a white. And then you go grab your Final Fortune. With that Final Fortune, you take another turn after you've obviously flickered your Spellseeker. Then on the upkeep of your next turn, your Ephemerate comes back, flickers your Spellseeker. And once again, this is on your upkeep, still before your draw. You get an Enlightened Tutor, grab an Underworld Breach, and then hopefully you'll have enough cards in graveyard to just be able to win with Underworld Breach in your graveyard and win that turn. And that is a way, if you have the Jeskai colors, to basically turn Spellseeker into a 1-card combo. Spellseeker plus Ephemerate. Ephemerate obviously has a lot of really great synergy with things like Dockside in the list. As I mentioned, playing Imperial Recruiter, stuff like that. So Ephemerate's already like pretty decent here. And then, turning Spellseeker into a 1-card combo seemed pretty good on top of that.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, so that's a lot of combos in this deck, and then the rest of the deck we'll talk about in a bit.
Yeah. My win cons, obviously I'm doing the Glinthorn Buccaneer nonsense, but that's
For sure.
the only actual win con that I have in this. I'm also my other win con, I put in quotation marks. I mean, it is a win con. Is added in a Stoneforge package, which is something that I've been really liking in playing an Dragonlord Ojutai, and it felt like it fit into this really well since I'm already playing like a controlling game plan. Adding in a little bit of extra ways to kind of beat down the board felt like it was a really good thing to have. Stuff like Umezawa's Jete, I think, is pretty good generically, and then sort of Feast and Famine, sort of Fire and Ice. I sound like I'm playing like a casual deck, but it is been, in my experience, very good to have those cards, especially when you're playing kind of a control, like a generic control shell. So that's what I've got going on. Cobble, what are your win cons?
So I think Glinthorn Buccaneer is just the de facto combo that everyone is using to win. One thing to note is that he deals his damage when you discard, and his discard ability is only activated during combat, but that doesn't mean that you have to be in combat in order to win. So, so with Magda plus either Universal Automaton, which is a 1-mana changeling artifact that happens to be a dwarf and also happens to be a pirate.
Double triggers. Let's go.
That is able to be looked up with Urza's Saga and, all the other stuff. You're able to go and find Clock of Omens, which says tap 2 artifacts to untap an artifact. So what you do is you tap the automaton and a treasure to untap the automaton. And when the automaton gets tapped, it creates a treasure. So then you can tap the automaton again and the treasure you just created to make infinite tapped treasures.
Right.
So
which is what Magda usually uses to win as a standalone list, right? Yeah.
Yep. Magda doesn't need to tap the treasures in order to sack them.
Exactly.
Magda just needs to sack them. So what you do is you can put all of your artifacts onto the battlefield at instant speed, but basically you go and find Sensei's Divining Top, and then you activate Sensei's Divining Top to draw a card, and now Sensei's Divining Top is technically in your library, so you can search it again and put it onto the battlefield, and then put all your cards into your hand, and then play Glinthorn, and then move to discard, and you win.
GG's.
So, right. You can also you don't require Glinthorn to win, though. With Niv Mizzet, I'm not using Curiosity to machine gun the table, but you can do Twister loops with Underworld Breach. So same idea. And I am running wheels in this list. I think I'm the only one that's running the 3 main wheels, but that's because I'm really focused on the treasure aspect and Smothering Tithe and so on. So it's important to prioritize silence effects to make sure that you can pull off the wheels without opening the door for somebody else to be able to combo out. So and the original iteration of this list actually ran Brutaclad. So there was some really, really wild combos where you could, turn all your treasures into Ragavans, or turn all your treasures into Goblin Engineers, or other interesting things that you could do that created interesting board states. So that eventually wound up getting cut just because it was more cute than anything else.
Yeah.
I think that's it for the win.
That's a really cool package. I love the way that you use Magda in that. When we look at key cards for you, Ian, what are going to be some of the key pieces to this Braucom deck?
Braucom. Yeah. So so one thing I forgot to mention with the Curiosity lines and Ophidian Eye is that those also work with Glinthorn Buccaneer without Malcolm being on the battlefield. So what you can do is you can attack with your Glinthorn and then do the whole discard thing. And as long as you get up to 8 cards in your hand so that you have to do a cleanup step, you can then start cleanup step looping with those cards and actually kill your opponents that way. I just wanted to mention that before. I mean, it's also part of this key card synergy things here. So I think one that we're all playing that I think is pretty underrated with Malcolm in general is Ketus, Emberclaw Familiar, which is a card that's kind of nonsense anywhere else, but here it's actually pretty attractive. It's 1 in a red for I think it's a 1/1 with partner. And so it basically says whenever commander you control deals combat damage, it deals damage to each player. So now suddenly every time Malcolm's swinging in, you're making 3 treasures. I think
when you have Bruse Tarl.
Yeah. That doesn't even mention when you have Bruse Tarl, which gets absolutely ridiculous. I think there's been some work on Malcolm Ketus. I think that's a very underexplored option in our format, just in general. I've actually been looking at playing Ketus in like a Grixis Malcolm deck as well. I think the synergy there is just absolutely insane. Some other key cards are some of the 2-drop pirates I'm playing. As I mentioned, we want to have as many playable 2-drop pirates. I really want to stress that. I didn't want to dive into the dumpster for these 2-drop pirates just to play Pyre of Heroes. So I'm playing some that I find,
to be decent.
The inclusion.
That Dockside Extortionist card's all right? Like it really is just there to enable the Pyre.
For sure. Dockside is obviously there for that reason. I'm playing a number of 1-drop pirates. Because those obviously can go from 1 to 2 with Pyre. Obviously, being able to turn like a Siren Stormtamper into a Dockside is obviously going to be a really good synergy in general. But then next turn, if you get a chance to untap, you then can go 2 into 3 and get your Glinthorn. Unsettled Mariner is a spicy inclusion. It's a changeling that makes it so your opponents have to basically pay 1 more to target your stuff, which when you're playing a creature-based combo, it turns out it's actually pretty good. Just that little bit of tax stopping your opponents doing stuff, it ends up adding up a lot. And then I'm also playing Direfleet Daredevil, which in a Jeskai sort of value mid-range deck it's really hard to be a bad option just casting your opponent's stuff out of their graveyards. You're hoping to play like sort of a medium-long game. And so that's where you get a lot of like ups in that area. As far as like middle ground stuff, any other important pieces, playing a lot of interaction here, a lot of stuff that meant to target the current meta, playing Counterbalance with Sensei's Divining Top as an option there, just to have that sort of control over what your opponents are doing there, and also playing Mindbreak Trap, which I know Callahan,
I'm also playing
that one. It's just been very attractive in the current meta. Like it is really good at stopping what your opponents are doing pretty easily. and just having it for free when you're playing against something that is way faster than what you're doing without having to stop your own development. Things like that tend to be pretty good. The Magda,
it's nice to answer Flusterstorm too.
Right, exactly. There's a lot of, and as I mentioned, there's a lot of unexplored or underexplored space in these Malcolm decks with the treasure synergies, I think. That's one thing I definitely learned from playing around with these options is that, Magda plus Malcolm plus some things that you can tutor. If you go into Grixis, suddenly your Magda Malcolm combination is getting you a Bolus of Citadel onto the battlefield. So there's a lot of really cool space you can play around with that option. And then obviously cards like Ragavan are just insane with Malcolm.
Ragavan is just insane, full stop.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Some of the key cards for my list, I mentioned the Stoneforge package, but I'm also not on Underworld Breach. And that is because I am actively playing Rest in Peace, Grafdigger's Cage, Sanctifier, and Vec. I am actively trying to hate out those types of decks and play a different type of game plan. I'm also playing Magus of the Moon and Blood Moon. I've seen that be way more disruptive than I originally thought it would be. Specifically playing it with Phoenix, where he's been playing it in Prosper, and seeing how disruptive it is even in a dockside meta, it made me kind of go, okay, maybe this is actually worth playing a little bit more of and seeing what's going on with it.
So what made you draw the line to back to basics? What made you say that was too far?
It wasn't that it was too far. It was that I couldn't find a home for it. I couldn't find a slot. And in play testing this, I only have 8 basics. So it's not like I have a ton of basics out that I can play them. There's certainly a world where I could rearrange this a little bit and make it much more friendly to back to basics.
Right. Yeah, I guess that's more of what I meant by the too far option is what prevent you from converting fully to a back to basics.
Being lazy and not wanting to change the mana base. let's be completely frank. I hate making mana bases with a passion. And this one was one where I felt like I could make it fairly well, but I didn't feel like I went as far as making it functional with a Blood Moon. And I didn't feel doing any extra work
going further
to make it functional with back to basics. But I do think those are all things that people should be considering right now. I'm also playing a lot of different removal than you generally see. I'm playing a card that Cobble has mentioned before on our show, which is Heliod's Intervention. I'm playing Path to Exile. I am of the opinion that if it's good enough for Modern, it's good enough for me. I mean, there are 9 times out of 10, it's going to be better than Swords to Plowshares. Because nobody plays basics. And the handful of people who have basics, you're like, all right, whatever. And that kind of dovetails into my other piece of removal that I've been pretty high on recently, which is Winds of Abandon. It ends up just being a one-sided Wrath 90% of the time. And if your opponents get, we were talking about this earlier today with Callahan from Playing with Power on Twitter. And he mentioned something along the lines of, the floor is really low where, you're playing Winota and you get they get 7 lands out of it. And my counter to that was, if Winota is getting 7 lands off of Windsor Rebuke, I was losing anyway. This probably put me in a way better position, and them having only Winota and nothing to trigger it, I'm going to take that every day of the week.
Agreed.
So I think Winds of Abandon is ridiculously underplayed. And
the fact that it exiles
very important.
Is also, because a lot of people want to recur their docksides with, Underworld Breach and things like that. And making that not an option and just completely removing those threats altogether makes the long game much more in your favor.
Especially in a deck like this, right? Where we are 100% chips all in on this game is going to go long. So it's very good here. Obviously, don't play this in your turbo decks. I don't know that it's that good. But I think in mid-range control stack shells, it's absolutely worth a slot. Another card that I'm going to probably try to sell here a little bit is Prismatic Ending. And it's a card that I think I'm not as sold on, but I like it so far in playing with it, because at minimum it says you pay 1 white and you exile a Ragavan, right? You exile something for 1 CMC at minimum. And I think that's not unvaluable, especially in decks that are probably wanting to get around like Pithing Needle, Grafdigger's Cage, things like that. Like if you need around that, I think Prismatic Ending is a very flexible piece of interaction that a lot of people are overlooking, in my opinion. I don't know if it's perfect for everything, but it's a very flexible piece of interaction that, again, you're able to exiling a piece is huge. So like, I think there's a lot of instances where I have seen it be valuable even at 4 mana. So, you know, it's a spicier include, but I would encourage people to try it out. Cobble, looking at some of your key cards, what do you got going on over there?
A lot that's already been said. So Niv Mizzet is a linchpin in the deck. Obviously, we want to stretch the game out until we can find a combo. If it makes sense to be able to just put Niv Mizzet straight onto the battlefield with Magda, or to be able to pay it with treasure tokens. Normally, Niv Mizzet is a little bit difficult because of the color requirements. We're generating so many treasures typically that it's not an issue in this particular case, and we can just kind of once Niv Mizzet's on the battlefield, the game kind of rotates around that card because it throttles the tempo of the game, and because people don't want to play into it, and it allows you to, you know, eliminate all of the, you know, value engines that people have on the battlefield.
It's difficult to remove.
It's hard to remove, and it creates a big diversion. It's one of those things where people can't really sandbag their interaction for your combo stuff because they need to put all of their focus on somehow getting rid of Niv Mizzet. So it's great as a diversion in that way. Magda is a big part of the game plan here. Just it's another one of those things that generates treasures. It uses treasures to put whatever artifact you need onto the battlefield at instant speed. And there's a lot of circumstances where, you know, you've got a, you know, Imperial Recruiter that's already on the battlefield, or your Spellseeker already on the battlefield, and you want to bounce it. You go and find Cloudstone Curio and then play a Ragavan, and then, you know, bounce back and forth a couple of times with Dockside.
Like really selling me on playing Magda in my deck.
It's so
I'm
good.
like really so annoyed at that oversight on my end.
Right. So the thing, a lot of times what happens is if you have Dockside and Cloudstone Curio, people are like, all right, you got infinite mana, but what do you do with it? Because you don't have an outlet. Magda's the outlet. Magda lets you convert all of those treasures into a win.
Yeah.
So, again, the Silence, Grand Abolisher, Ranger Captain, those are really important to prioritize for when you're going to be, you know, executing a wheel or trying an Underworld Breach package. You know, we want to get Smothering Tithe onto the battlefield just because that, again, increases the threat of Magda coming down and just winning off of that, and also allows us to just, you know, play our game and accelerate really quickly. Intuition, very similar to what Ian was saying. You know, you've got your stock Savine's Underworld Breach LED, but in this particular case, you know, being able to grab Glinthorn Buccaneer and Magda, and in my case, Dermataxi, which can be a Glinthorn Buccaneer or a Magda. And when it's a Magda, then it's a artifact dwarf. So again, you have that, either one of those is just a I win combo.
Mm-hmm.
So you can sometimes cast your Glinthorn Buccaneer and then someone counters it, or someone removes it when you're moved to combat or something like that. And you can, after combat, play Dermataxi and have it become a Glinthorn Buccaneer and then do the thing. So there's a lot of recursion and a lot of backups to be able to push things through opposing
Dermataxi is such a funny card. Like the name of it, the flavor of it, the design. It's just, it's so fun.
Right.
So when we look at kind of the cards that we're playing here in this deck, so let's take a look over here at the artifact suites that we're both playing. And so we're all on Arcane Signet, we're all on Chromox, Jeweled Lotus, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Mox Diamond,
all the boring stuff.
all the stuff you expect to see in a deck like this. Yeah,
the staples.
For
when
sure.
it comes to unique cards, Ian, you've got Pyre of Heroes, which you've talked about pretty extensively, right? Like Pyre of Heroes, and this is pretty good.
It's just a win con.
My differences obviously are very unique. I'm playing like a full Stoneforge package and Grafdigger's Cage and Pithing Needle. And Cobble, you have the stuff to enable Magda, but you're also playing Aether Spellbomb. And what does that do for you?
Aether Spellbomb is a removal spell that doesn't require a cast. So if you've got Magda on the table and somebody plays something like Hermit, Malevolent Hermit, the opposite side of it, being able to go and put Aether Spellbomb onto the battlefield and bounce it in response to them trying to combo off is pretty useful. So it's a 1 mana get out of jail free in that particular case. Talked about Clock of Omens and Cloudstone Curio and Dermataxi. Springleaf Drum is something that just happens to synergize really well with Magda because you can just tap it the turn it comes down, make mana and a treasure. So that's what those are all about.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's interesting to look at how the differences in our decks, you can kind of characterize and see the differences very clearly just in the artifact suite, right? Because of the fact that our artifact suites all are pieces of that enable our win cons, right? Like you've got the Pyre of Heroes, you've got the clock, you've got the Stoneforge package, which, a little bit different. But as we look at the creature suite, to everybody's surprise, we are all playing Esper Sentinel, Glinthorn Buccaneer, Dockside, Ketus, and Ragavan and Spellseeker. And when we look at the unique cards here, you already talked about Unsettled Mariner. You already talked about Dire Fleet Daredevil. And I think Simeon Spirit Guide is pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, sure.
Grizzleaxe Ithalid Scholar is one of your unique cards. And this is an interesting card. I've been interested to see somebody do something with this. So what's going on with this?
I have been on record before saying objectively, in my opinion, Timna plus Malcolm is the in a vacuum best.
That was on our show
of partners. Yes, I believe so. Just because the fact that one produces card advantage, one produces mana advantage, and they have evasion and blah, 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 give you good colors, right? So Grizzleaxe is, it's basically Timna. And I was talking to someone the other day who was playing Timna in a deck. And I was like, why would you not play Grizzleaxe in this list? Because it's like Timna, but it gives you combat advantage and also means you're not paying life. And they were like, oh, I didn't really even think this was a thing. And I was like, yeah. So Grizzleaxe is just really solid. And as I mentioned before, I talked about the utility of playing all those curiosity effects. I've talked about, playing, the things that turn Malcolm into a card advantage engine. Grazlax is just that. The upside is that if you hit other opponents with other creatures in your deck, and I'm playing 15, so it's not like the most amount of creatures, but I'm playing some low to the ground evasive pirates, things like Siren Stormtamer, Spectral Sailor, for the, innate pirate synergies, as well as the fact that getting treasures off Malcolm, et cetera, et cetera. So all of those pieces sort of indicated to me that just throwing in Grazlax in here, having it basically be my Tymna and Jeskai seemed pretty solid to me.
Yeah, that seems really good. How relevant is the first ability of, what does it say? Whenever a creature you control.
Oh, the bounce blockers. Sure. So like there's cute stuff with things that have ETB. So for example, Dockside. Yeah. So Dockside's huge here, right? So say you have Grazlax out, right? What your and let's even go another step further. You have Malcolm out, right? If you let Dockside connect, what you're saying is I get a card draw and I get a mana, which is pretty huge. And what you say then is, and if you block, I can also just pick up my Dockside and play it again. That seems pretty good to me. So that goes for like a lot of the creatures in the deck, like things like Magda, right? Like Magda swings in. If it gets tapped, it still makes the treasure like it needs to. But then if it gets blocked, you're picking it up. So is it the most relevant ability in the entire deck? No. It's also very cute with Bruse because Bruse, if you want to give Magda double strike and it's not the turn Bruse comes down, I've kind of figured this out playing Dawnwaker sometimes. Sometimes you have to put Bruse in an awkward position to give another creature double strike. However, with Grazlax on the battlefield, you can do things like attack with Bruse, give the important creature, probably Malcolm, double strike, put Bruse back in your hand if it gets blocked in an inopportune way. So there's a lot of cute stuff you can definitely do with that.
That's super cool. I love it.
Yeah. And it helps that Grazlax is both sides of the incentivizing process, right? So it's like block and you give me another ETB. Don't block, you give me a card.
Right. Very interested on this piece here. I'm looking at our creature suites. I'm the only one on Gilded Drake.
I noted that too. That was interesting.
Is there a reason you both are not on Gilded Drake?
I probably forgot. If I'm being honest.
Fair. I'm just looking at this and I'm like, surely I'm not the only one who played Gilded Drake. Cobble, did you have a reason for not being on Gilded Drake?
No real way to tutor it because the recruiters, both recruiters are looking for a 2 on one side or the other. And honestly, we've got so much removal anyway in other forms that I feel like it didn't fit in the moment. I'm sure that can be contested and people can debate that.
Tell Cobble why he's wrong down in the comments.
Yep, please tell me I'm wrong.
It's also interesting. You spoke about, you're doing the recruiter stuff. You're doing the goblin engineer stuff. You're also on Dragon's Rage Channeler. You're the only one of us playing DRC. Yes. And I'm not a hypocrite, everybody. I have said every deck with red should be playing this. And I guess I should go on record to asterisk next to that. Unless you're also actively playing Graveyard Hate.
Sure.
Right? Like,
yeah, fair enough.
I had it in my list originally, and then I kind of went through it when I was like kind of trying to make cuts. And I was like, I'm on Rest in Peace Sanctifier and Grafdigger's Cage. I should probably cut this. This feels like a heavy nombo.
See, I've also been on record saying I don't think you should play this card unless you're playing Tymna. So I think we have two polar opposite perspectives here on that one.
I think it's stupid good in specifically like Storm Shells.
And right. I think that it's very good when you have Niv Mizzet out. I mean, Niv Mizzet by itself is great.
For sure.
But being able to filter every single draw to make sure that you're getting money on every one of those draws to be able to continue interacting with people or continuing to have the pieces that you need to forward your game plan, while at the same time also filling your graveyard for an eventual underworld breach. I mean, the synergy is just really
it's unseated,
and at one red mana,
Delver in Legacy for a reason, right? Like it's that good,
right? Yes.
And then obviously some of the other differences. I'm also playing Stoneforge Mystic. I probably could be on a recruiter package, honestly. Looking at this, just because that does help tutor up some of my like Stoneforge stuff through a super roundabout way, but I probably could be.
I'm interested. I'm the only one running Draneth Magistrate.
Wait, I'm not? Oh, no, well, that's 100% an oversight. I absolutely should be on Draneth.
So for me, Draneth is obviously like it's a very, very powerful utility piece. I think in a deck like this, every slot has a lot of value to it. I think it's really hard to cut things for cards that are just generically valuable. That being said, we are playing cards like Ketus, which is generically valuable with your commander, but I think the inherent synergies with something like Magda are more powerful to me than having a piece like Draneth. Now, Draneth is very, very strong. Don't get me wrong, but there's a reason I don't play it in like my most classic mid-range deck, which is Dominator Thrasios, and it's just because without something like Tymna to take advantage of it, it's a good stacks piece. But if you're not playing stacks, I tend to not play stacks pieces, even if they are asymmetrical.
I 100% just forgot the card existed when I was making this. I would probably replace Siren Storm Tamer with Draneth pretty fast, actually.
Seems like a pretty fair swap there. Yeah.
Man, I feel really dumb. When we look at,
I'm interested that you're playing Sanctifier Envec. I have found that card to be quite.
I found it to be so good. It's especially in this red heavy world that people are living in. So it's good in two worlds. One, if somebody is on Wheel of Fortune sort of nonsense, you take that out of their game plan real fast. We are also doing things that it's also there sort of for redundancy, honestly, because we do care about breach. We don't want people to get that sort of thing back. So if we are able to, begin doing something where we can get that out of somebody's hand and put it into a graveyard, it's gone. It's also been, there's that. It's also incredibly good against the proliferation of these black-red storm decks that are red with black tutors. And this makes it very difficult for them to continue to do the thing, and adds another layer for them to have to try and interact with it. Like I said, Rest in Peace is the real one. But this is also part of the kind of deck building like exercise that I'm putting myself through right now of taking the heuristics of, okay, so they're playing 4 Rest in Peace in Jeskai Stoneblade Modern, right? So obviously they really want this effect. And then how does that, do I want that much graveyard hate in Commander? Yes, I do. I'm just going to be frank. I want to be on that much graveyard hate. It's really good. So at one point I even had Weathered Runestone in here, and I ended up cutting it just because I was like, 3 slots are fine. Sanctifier is in a lot of respects a second Rest in Peace for a lot of the stuff that you care about. The stuff that people are going to be looping generally outside of like, Brain Freeze are going to be red cards. Or black cards.
So following up on that, why not Weathered Runestone? Because to me, that seems like it has the added benefit of also hating on green decks.
I wanted to play Weathered Runestone, but the big downside with Weathered Runestone is I can't grab it off of Urza Saga. And with my with my tutor suite being pretty equipment oriented. I didn't want to have a piece that was more awkward to acquire. So Weathered Runestone's probably the hardest of all the cards of all of them to get a hold of, I feel like. Where, I mean, maybe Sanctifier is harder, I guess. But Weathered Runestone, it really in my mind was, well, I can't get this off of Urza Saga. And, I do some Saga stuff because I think Saga is like a very, very, very powerful card. So that was kind of my thought process on it. But you're probably right. I probably should consider Weathered Runestone. Also, there obviously I made some omissions in this, right? I don't have freaking Draneth. I can't believe I did that. I cannot believe I made that omission. I feel really stupid right now. But looking onto the enchantment suites, obviously we talked about everybody's playing Mystic Grimoire and Rhystic Study. Duh. Wow. What? So surprised. Do you remember that weird, like, brief time in CEDH last year where people were just like, I don't need to play Rhystic Study?
Rhystic Study is too slow.
I tend to not tell people they're stupid. That was a time when I was pretty liberal with that term.
I remember that time, and like me and Morgan specifically were just like, what are you talking about? So thankfully all three of us are on Mystic Grimoire Rhystic Study here. Yeah. You both are on Underworld Breach. Ian and I both are on Counterbalance. And Ian, you're the one who's kind of sold me on Counterbalance in a lot of these decks. Talk about Counterbalance here for a minute.
Oh man, so Counterbalance does so many things in this format that, like, if you're a Turbo Nas player, especially if you're a Cody player, right? So Counterbalance tells Cody to go shove, right? Because a lot of the times the like bad case scenario, and I'm putting that in quotations right now, with Counterbalance is that you have like a land on top, right? Which is like a significant portion of your deck is likely to be indicative that you do have a land on top, right? Just statistically with the way deck composition works. It's like a third of your deck, if not more, if you're playing 0-drop artifacts, right? If you're playing something like Cody, that stops your game plan because the Profane Tutor gets countered, right? Any ad nauseum strategy, obviously, when you resolve a Nas, you want to be able to then pivot and play those 0-mana artifacts. Those get countered. And that's just the scenario in which you have a 0 on top. Not to mention there are times when you have a 1 or a 2. And with the efficiency of our format, a lot of the CMCs tend to be quite similar. So I played in a pod the other day that was like pretty mid-range, swingy, heavy.
That game was miserable. I can't believe he won through. He guested on Team Turn 3 on Sunday. Yeah. And the pod composition was Pongo's playing Kenrith. I'm playing Ojutai, Dragon Lord Ojutai. You're playing Xanathar. And Spleedface is playing Orvar. And this motherfucker won with Orvar through a Chalice on 1 and his Counterbalance with a 1 on top. Like, I don't know how he did it.
Yeah, with the 1-drop spell.
But he was able to...
Malevolent Hermit.
Yeah, he was able to make enough islands that he was able to get a Malevolent Hermit off and then just win through it.
Yeah.
But that is specifically, I believe, the game you're referring to.
Yes. But so there's many times when Counterbalance is there and you're flipping over these 1 and 2s, right? Once again, because of the tight compact level of the CMC of our format, that unless you're in a game like that where you're playing with a lot of outliers, a lot of the time you are countering the most efficient stuff being played out of your opponents. A lot of the time it gets compared to something like Mana Drain, right? Except for in this scenario, you get to play your Mana Drain and then forget about it, as opposed to holding up 2 mana every single turn. Obviously, it's a soft comparison, but these are things that people look at. A lot of synergies with things like Crom, Sensei's Divining Top, cards like that. And even more so, it's a lot of synergy against certain pieces that people tech to beat options, right? So if we're talking about decks like Turbo Ad Nauseam, Grixis, Blue Farm, all those decks, they play things like Silence, Hope of Gear Ripper, Ranger Captain of Eos, Grand Abolisher. And Counterbalance does not give a flying F about any of those things, because it is a triggered ability. It is, unless you have a stifle, you are not having you are not free of counterbalance. You have to remove the counterbalance if you want to be able to try and storm off through those things. So now these decks have to go a layer deeper to fight through that card, which is pretty huge because previously, people are just like, silence, I win the game. But now with counterbalance, you really get to be like, we're not to mention you can flip over a 1-drop and counter the silence in the first place and just really stick it to them.
that? Right.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very powerful option.
The most typical removal that people would use for counterbalance would be Nature's Claim or Chain of Vapor, which also happen to be 1-drops.
Yeah, which are very easily countered. Yeah.
I have decided in like control decks, it is probably the closest thing control decks will get to an answer to the multiplayer problem of playing control, right? Of you just kind of run out of spells after a certain point. Whereas if you can land a counterbalance, you have way more opportunities to interact with people.
Completely agree.
And say yes and say no to, it's like, I'll let you have this. I'm not going to let you have this. You can have your preordained. That's fine. And I think that is something that I would encourage a lot of people who like playing stacks, like playing control, to consider, because I think it just it just adds so many layers. Because I've seen a lot of people say, oh, well, you flip it over and it's not the right card on top. Okay, yes. The same thing can be said about your hand, right? Where you don't have the counter spell in your hand. So you're just putting down long-term insurance that you might have an answer. And I think that's very helpful in a multiplayer format.
Yeah. And there's times where you flip it over on one thing and then it's just a stacks piece, right? For like an entire rotation of the table. Not to mention synergies with Sensei's Divining Top, Brainstorm, Preordained Ponder, all those things. Like there's a lot of powerful stuff you can do with it.
I really like it. And you have shown me the way. This is the way. One thing that's very interesting is, Cobble, you're the only one playing Smothering Tithe. And I think that is in no small part to the fact that you're the only one on all the wheels.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm
chicken or the egg.
Right. I'm very much invested in the treasure plan to be able to make the best use of Magda whenever it comes down, to be able to just win if you've got a pile of treasure. So Smothering Tithe is just a huge advantage piece in that way. Even without the wheels, it is just sitting there making treasure. And either, people are either paying for it and they're, losing their resources, or you're just gaining resource advantage. So it's really strong in this particular apparatus. And sometimes just making 21 treasures and casting a silence and then having that silence get countered and then casting Underworld Breach and then casting the silence again and then just winning. You just have enough mana to do whatever line you need to. And I'm never unhappy to see it.
It was very good, because I definitely left it on the chopping room floor, and I still can't believe I forgot Drannith. Every time I talk about a card that I didn't include, I'm immediately reminded of the fact that I didn't include Drannith in my control stacks deck.
Talk about land tax in a 3-color.
Yeah, well, I'm playing Blood Moon, and I want to be able to ensure that I can get basics out to get through a Blood Moon. I also just am of the opinion that land tax is pretty uniquely powerful as a ramp piece. Ramp as many quotation marks as you want. I think being able to grab basics out of your deck is powerful, especially in a deck where I'm playing like a pretty reasonable amount of basics. And I think if I were to play into it further, I would include Back to Basics, rework this mana base to a more basic oriented deck list and lean into it even further, honestly, because I think being able to do that, I feel like puts me ahead of my opponents, especially when I'm like doing things like, hey, I would like to have good cards that I'm drawing, right? Instead of, oh, this is a land. And being able to color fix is also important. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. I've really liked land tax in the decks that I've been playing it in. Also, like I said, I'm playing Blood Moon, which is unique, and Rest in Peace. I think if your deck can support Rest in Peace, I feel like people should be playing Rest in Peace. Turns out that saying no to graveyards is pretty good. When people are doing Underworld Breach stuff all the time. Moving on over to the Instant Sorcery Suite. We're all on a lot of the same stuff. But the big differences here, and we'll look at Cobble's here. Cobble, you're on Red Elemental Blast, Mental Misstep, and Snap, and you're the only... I didn't left out Mental Misstep. Jesus Christ.
Did I leave out Misstep? Oops.
Jesus. I feel real... People in the comments are going to look at us like, what are you doing this?
Yeah. To be fair, historically, if there is a spell in the Counterspell Suite that I will forget, it has always been Mental Misstep. I do not why. It is my Mental Misstep.
Did not include... So with this, I didn't use like the package tool on Moxfield. And I guarantee you that's why I forgot this. Is because my brain just omitted it. I have ADHD, if you didn't know that. But Cobble, so talk to me about Snap. Talk to me about Red Elemental Blast. What's going on here?
Red Elemental Blast, like Pyroblast, is really well positioned right now. It's a counterspell counter. It is it counters Thassa's Oracle. It removes Notion Thief. Hull Breacher is no more, so that's not really part of the picture. But there's, it removes a counterbalance. There's just a lot of attractive permanence for it to remove, and it helps you efficiently win counter wars. So if I run Pyroblast, I generally also run REB as well in most cases.
See, I'm very surprised to hear you say that because I have the exact opposite take about Red Blast right now. Wow. I think with the removal of Hull Breacher in the format, it has become very bad. Which is, I'm aware a lot of people think it's a hot take. I think the same thing about Carpet of Flowers right now. The format and the players in this format are so greedy. I literally spent an entire tournament the last tournament I was in with a dead Veil of Summer in hand because I couldn't tell you the last time someone actually countered something I was doing instead of going for their own win. It is just, I found that Red Blast, Carpet, Veil of Summer, all these cards that were untouchable staples in our format are becoming more and more useless the more greedy players get. And it's blowing my mind, but it's just been a positive feedback loop as far as like getting rid of these cards and having less dead draws. So it's kind of wild to me.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess that it's also fairly metagame dependent because
they're different metagames though. Like I tend to play in a lot of different tournaments, and I guess you make points about the type of people who play in tournaments, but these are different servers, different places around the internet, different, I don't tend to play in the same places a lot as I kind of jump from tournament to tournament, but it's just what I've been noticing lately, which is just really low numbers on these cards.
Wow.
Yeah.
Anyway, we should be on Mental Misstep.
For sure. That one definitely.
Oh my gosh. Snap is also really good.
Snap. Snap is there. It's a removal piece. It's a recursion for Dockside. Mm-hmm. If you slam Cloudstone, but you've already got your creatures in play, being able to bounce one of them to your hand and then start off. Again, Ephemerate could probably work just as well or better. So I think I might take a look at that Ephemerate.
I will say,
loop. Yeah,
Snap has the added benefit of also just kind of acting like a ritual. I think that's one of the things I know when Phoenix was selling it to Pongo for Najeela, that was one of the main things that he kind of talked about is this ends up just being a ritual.
It's really good with Cradle. And we don't have access to that here.
I think it's a lot better with green. If you're playing Wild Growth, Utopia Sprawl, Gaia's Cradle.
Yeah. I still think it's good here.
It tends to be.
I you know.
That's another card I've been really like hilly with, where there's been times where I'm like, you double your dock side, this card's broken. And then there's other times where I've been like, yeah, but it costs 2 up front. And that really sucks.
I mean, yeah, but it's also kind of free. Yeah. Like, and it can also just ramp you, right? Because if you have if you're using treasures to cast it, then you're coming out ahead.
Yeah. I don't know. In a lot of cases,
I agree with that mentality.
Snap, I find it to be good for color fixing.
True.
If you've got certain lands that are tapped already and you need to make another color of something that's tapped and being able to just untap those. In this particular case, we've got so many treasures around that, unless somebody's got a Stony Silence or a Null Rod or something like that.
You're going to have an abundance of mana in this deck, I feel like. Or any of these 3 options, I should say.
Yeah, we're not going to be color strapped most of the time.
Yeah.
Looking at your list, and obviously you touched on Final Fortune, Brain Freeze. You're on Chain of Vapor, and it's interesting because this is a card that I have become exceedingly disenchanted with.
I agree.
What are your thoughts on why here, and your kind of thoughts in general on it?
So I'm definitely more. I would say, as apart from the Niv Mizzet plan, there are very few things I really care about getting bounced back for me. There is arguments about like, I'm going to say this. If you're in a scenario where your opponent sacks a land to bounce a Malcolm with a Curiosity on it, that opponent is desperate. And I don't think that's a realistic scenario. I'll say that. You could get blown out in that sense. I'm going to, put air quotes behind that, but I don't think that's a likely play pattern. So in that scenario, Chain of Vapor having the added benefit of working really well with Underworld Breach for me in this deck, because obviously I'm on those lines. And the flexibility to hit anything for 1 mana is worth it enough, given the fact that I'm in Jeskai, to warrant its inclusion.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I'd rather instant speed, so I don't want to play Void Snare.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's where I'm at.
All right, so I know you guys have questions about mine, and some of my includes, right? Because I'm playing Counterspell, baby. I'm playing Dovin's Veto, and I'm playing a Braid, Path to Exile, Spell Snare, Wear Tear. I'm going. I've said this before, but in control decks, I think I've said this with about Lavinia, is I noticed very, very clearly a lack of not having Counterspell in control-oriented decks. And I also think people should just be playing more hard counters, but that's like a whole different conversation.
Coming around to that. Yeah. I've been leaning back over to the hard counters or super necessary phase. Wear Tear is the one I'm actually, which may not be even the most egregious to most people, but that one's the one where I'm like, do you really need it? Given the fact that you have Cyclonic Rift to deal with any permanent, you have the card you mentioned earlier, Prismatic Ending. I feel like you have a lot of answers here.
Kind of the point.
Tear,
is to have all the answers. And this is go back to the deck building exercise where it's, okay, so we're playing these many answers. So we're playing, they're playing 4 Prismatic Endings in Jeskai Stoneblade decks. That translates to about 5 in 100 card decks if you count the sideboards into that. Which I am doing. So when you look at it in that light, I'm going, okay, so what are the things that I want to remove the most? So I want to, and they're also playing like paths. So it's pretty easy for me to go, okay, here are path cards, right? I'm going to play, what was the card I played up here? The creature, I think I have, no, I didn't put it in here. Jesus, I really excluded some cards. But you have swords, you have path, you have these things, you have winds of abandon.
Sure.
And I said, okay, so what are the things that I'm going to want to remove the most often? And that's, it's enchantments and enchantments and artifacts. And
so, yeah, that's where I'm curious. Like what enchantments and artifacts are you feeling you need to answer that proactively?
Breach,
in the current meta?
Right. Being able to answer somebody's win attempt, I think, is absolutely important. Null rod, right? Like if somebody slams a null rod, I'm fucked, right? Like my entire game plan is based around it.
That argument.
I mean, I think even being able to answer somebody plays a Underworld Breach. Obviously, if they have a lot of cards in their pool, they're going to be able to fight through that.
You're messed up
easier.
Anyways, right.
But I'm now betting on, okay, I have a lot. My deck plays a real high density of interaction minus mental messed up.
For sure.
And because of that, I'm willing to bet that even if they do have an answer, I'm like, okay, well, I have a pretty high density of interaction here. I think that I can.
So then why are you letting the breach resolve in the first place?
It's to have flexible answers, right? You don't want to have just one answer. And this is kind of my point with this whole deck building philosophy thing that I'm trying to work through is I think it's important to have more than one answer. Like a lot of times we'll have, my board wipe is Cyclonic Rift. It's like, well, you kind of need more than just that. I think that especially in control decks, it is important to have 5 different ways of being able to interact with something. Sure. I considered at one point Hydro Blast. I every time I say something I considered, I want to punch myself in the face because I'm like sitting here going, I considered Hydro Blast, forgot to include Mental Misstep. It is so frustrating to me right now to talk about the cards that I included and know the cards that I excluded.
For sure.
Are we at a point that people should be playing Hydro Blast?
I've seen
Blue Elemental Blast.
I have seen people play it and had success with it. Should you? That's a very nuanced discussion, and I think it depends on what you're expecting to see.
I think
if you're expecting Ragavan, Dockside, Jessica's Will, Underworld Breach,
it's good against.
I think there were 2 cards. There were 2 cards there that I think you need to play that card for.
It's good against Winota too.
You shut up right now.
Against Winota.
I don't want to hear this heresy. Get out of here.
I'm sold.
God damn.
Got him.
I mean, honestly, it was a pretty convincing argument. I'm not gonna lie, given the numbers of Winota players showing up lately. But no, I think it's a piece, and I guess going back to a previous conversation. Well, first of all, Hydro Blast, I think it's worth considering. Definitely, there are options there, but it's also worth considering that like you're gonna run up against a green black turbo-y list or a Jund turbo-y list that really doesn't play that many red spells, and it's like that's just another. It's the same thing with Red Blast. If blue is scarce enough, how do we feel about red, right? And think about how many good blue cards there are.
I don't know. People are just leaning so hard into red right now.
I don't want to talk about it. But going back to the Wear Tear conversation, and I totally agree with given the philosophy of deck building that you've been producing with this list today, right? Given that mentality, the reason I brought up Wear Tear specifically was because you are playing Prismatic Ending, you're playing Heliod's Intervention, cards like that are really flexible answers. And the reason Wear Tear stuck out to me as kind of a weird option is with Wear Tear, it's different than Path or Counterspell, right? Because of those cards, if you even think about it in the 60 card format, those cards are always sideboard cards. So for me, the question is, how many sideboard cards do you want to put in your 100 card deck? How many cards that I don't know if it's maybe just my perspective in the format. I don't think there are enough artifacts and enchantments to warrant that many main deck slots. Like, I would rather see a lightning bolt in your list. And even that might be like not the most optimal option here. It's just an example of this is, I would rather be prepared to lose to a creature spell than I would be prepared to lose to an artifact or enchantment. You know what I mean? And obviously this isn't to nitpick over one card slot, but more bring up the discussion of, in this format, what is the priority? No, I think that's really smart. If you are going to go through this control conversation, what is the things that you need to be prepared to see? Which is why it's blowing my mind that things like Veil Summer and Red Blast are not being played anymore, because that shows that we have such a tonal shift in, and obviously not being played anymore is an exaggeration, but or even being questioned. It shows a major tonal shift in what people know as CEDH or what is played and what is common.
That's, I wonder if we were to look at the metagame project, if there's data to maybe illuminate that discussion.
For sure.
I would be interested to see if Squirrel Mob has information about that, because that I have not seen that in my local meta, but that's, I mean, if you're seeing that in the tournament scene, especially, it's worthy of note, because that's I think a dark tunnel to go down.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and that's why I think that decks like this are very important, right? Because I think being able to effectively punish those decks is very strong. And we touched on this in our conversation we were talking about with allies, the allied color pairings, and how there is an element to this where people are kind of dropping blue-black, which is bananas to me.
Very silly.
And they're going in all in on these things, and decks like these punish those real hard.
For sure.
For dropping such a good combo, right? And I think I guess kind of what I'm getting at is be the change you want to see in the world, right? Like,
I mean, there's a reason I'm bringing a mid-range deck to the next tournament, and it's because for this exact reason, right? Like you gotta be that answer to the things that are happening in the pod, as well as like producing quality stuff. Because if your opponents are either going so greedy that they crumple to a single thing, or they're playing such aggressive stacks that they're crumpling to their own decks, right? Then a deck with Thrasios is sitting there like, sure, guys, like, just tell me when you want me to counter something important, right? Like, you guys do your thing over there, right?
It's very interesting to have these conversations and think it through. Sure. I will say that I think because of the uptick in like Bolas' Citadel and stuff like that, I like being able to have extra artifact removal to go back to the Wear Tear thing.
Sure.
I do think that those are absolutely things that I'm willing to dedicate a slot to punch. But
seems valid.
Go ahead.
One thing before we move on, Cobble, because I don't want people to misconstrue what my point was, and I realized I wasn't clear about it. The things I'm noticing in the tournament scene, because of how proactive people are being right now, I'm not saying every single person is explicitly proactive. And because of that, right, we have a lot of counter meta decks right now, which tend to be low or multicolor stacks decks as well.
I.e. Winota, decks right?
In the pods, things, i.e. Winota, right? Kenrith pod, stacks. Or not Kenrith pod, because that's my personal list, but Kenrith stacks. I see a lot of, it may just be because I play with Choirboy in like every single tournament, but I see Sisay, things like that. These types of decks also don't get affected by things like Red Blast, Veil of Summer, etc. When these types of games turn into these like grindy, someone has a Rule of Law out or a second Rule of Law deck is at the table, those decks are also not being affected by things like Veil of Summer, Carpet of Flowers, Red Blast. So when I say those things are happening, it's not just the super aggressive proactive decks that are the only thing people are playing. It's the counter to those that also don't give a crud about what's also being played in those staple senses. So I just want to be clear about that, because I don't want everyone to think like if you sign up for a CEDH tournament, you're losing to a turn 2 Naz and there's literally another option, because that's not true. They've actually been really interesting games.
And I will say that's partially why I've included stuff like the graveyard hate, right? Is it hates on the counter to Underworld Breach too.
It
like
totally does.
The Kenra Stacks decks, how do they win? Oh, well, they do the whole Phantasmal Image Dockside loop thing, right? This makes that incredibly difficult to do.
Yeah, no, Rest in Peace is stupid. Like, please play this card. But Grafdigger's Cage too. Like, if you can break parity on these effects and not shoot yourself in the foot, and while being proactive, those cards are insane.
They're very good.
Insane.
But as we look down to the thing, I'm going to move around in our spreadsheet a little bit more. And this is the interesting part of, well, I think I'm going to move past the land section here, because the big difference I see is Cobble is on Inventor's Fair. You're playing like Spectator Seating, Sunbaked Canyon, right? Like the difference is the unique pieces to that I feel like are fairly self-explanatory, if that's fair to everybody.
One thing I will point out is I'm the only one on Gemstone Caverns, which I find very interesting.
I hate that card with a passion so much.
Wow.
I feel like Gemstone Caverns is a best fit for decks that are looking to race, that are just trying to accelerate out as fast as they can. And that's really not the priority for my particular list. So it winds up just being card disadvantage.
What I did? I took your Elsha deck on the database, looked at your mana base, and said, "Hello, Gemstone Caverns. You are now Urza's Saga." My opinion on Gemstone Caverns has been, especially in color intensive decks, I don't like having it, especially in these blue white. I've honestly considered cutting it from Ojutai. Because of the fact that it's such a color intensive deck where you need it for the counter spells. You need these things that if you just draw it, it's horrible. And I don't see it enough in the positions 2, 3, and 4 that I feel like in this type of deck, it's worthy of the inclusion.
Gotcha. See, I see it as in the opening hands, like a Chromox or a Mox Diamond. So that's my sort of analog with it. And I'm aware like post like Naz or whatever, it's not the same thing, but I think it is that much of a necessity for if you want to just like play proactively at the table.
That's fair. I get it in the middle of games when I'm trying to.
There's so many times you can be soured by that card.
There's so many times where I need counterspell mana, and I've cast like Mana Drain, and I've cast Dovin's Veto, and I have 2 mana sitting up, and it's a Tundra, and it's a Gemstone Caverns, and I'm screaming.
For sure.
And it's just one of those cards where I've been like progressively replacing stuff that I feel like just doesn't pull as much weight with like a basic. But
fair enough.
One thing I wanted to note was I'm intentionally not running Sacred Foundry, Spectator Seating, and Sunbaked Canyon just because of the mana weighting in the deck. I'm only 17% white and 33% and 25% respectively for blue and red. So I'm leaning more into those because of the representation of those colors.
It's funny
within the list.
Mine's like the complete opposite of that. Mine's 15% red and then 38% blue, 28% white. Like I am very much a blue white X deck.
Right. I'm very blue, also red.
You
also
are.
white.
It's very interesting here. You're definitely more
blue.
red than you are white. You have 48% blue, 21% red, 11% white.
11%. Yeah, to be honest, the mana base was not the thing
Same.
I spent the most time on. So.
I basically was like, all right, I need to make land tax and Blood Moon work. And that was about the extent of it. And I gave the old finger to Gemstone Caverns. But this is the thing that we're going to end on here. And I think it's probably the most interesting thing about we've never had this happen. There is the only overlap in all of our decks is Ian and I both have Ponder, and Cobble and Ian both have Gamble and Savine's Wreck and Transmute Artifact. That's it. There is all the overlap. There's no concurrent themes throughout this. So we're just going to go down through each of us here. And I'm going to go quickly through mine because I think mine is pretty self-explanatory. I have Prismatic Ending as removal, Winds of Abandon as a great removal piece. And then I have Open the Armory, Steel Shaper's Gift to round out the Stoneforge package. Yeah,
sure.
And
super
then
logical.
Ponder because I need some card advantage.
Because Ponder's a good card. Yeah, for sure.
And that's me. So, Cobble, I want to go to you first because I think you have some really interesting choices here. We've talked about the wheel package decisions here, but you have in here Sudden Demise. And so explain kind of what's going on with your sorcery package.
We care about having our creatures and keeping them on the table, which is one of the rationales for running Winds of Abandon. And in this particular case, a lot of times we want to sweep all of the dorks, but we don't want to kill our own Ragavan or Esper Sentinel or DRC or Automaton, etc. So having a way to say green and just kill all the dorks is a very asymmetric way to deal with board development. And in a pinch, you can use it to get rid of bigger threats as well. But I like it for the fact that it is got the potential for asymmetry baked into it.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. You're both on. Let me pull the thing back up. You're both on Savine's Wreck, which obviously dovetails really nicely with the Intuition and Underworld Breach lines. Now,
also good for just grabbing Glinthorn Buccaneer out of the yard.
Now, one thing I want to touch on here with yours, Ian, and this is touchy subject with me. So strap in.
Okay.
I hate the card Rite of Flame with a burning passion. Every time I see it in a list, I want to find the nearest bridge and jump off of it. So please explain to me why you're doing this to me.
I'll say, first of all, I respect you as a friend. It's okay to be wrong. No, I mean, for the same reason I'm playing Gemstone Caverns, I think Malcolm is such a solid payoff that I think it's wrong to not try and get as many turn one Malcolms as possible. I think maybe I prioritize Malcolm too much, but the thing is, especially in Malcolm decks, your rituals become an immediate return, right? So unlike in a lot of decks with a card like Rite of Flame or Simian Spirit Guide, which you see in my creature slot, or Gemstone Caverns, right? When you use these rituals, a lot of the time you don't get the mana back in most decks. In this deck, you have Malcolm, you get your mana back. So you use Rite of Flame to get out your Malcolm as soon as possible. So something like Gemstone Caverns, have Rite of Flame in your opening hand, boom, turn one Malcolm. Simian Spirit Guide, Rite of Flame, turn one Malcolm with the blue land, right? All of these scenarios get you a turn one Malcolm immediately. And I think a turn one Malcolm, if you're playing Malcolm based strategies, is hyper important. unless you're doing something broken, like playing an Esper Sentinel Mystic Remora early in the game, right? Or just dumping a ton of mana rocks. I think Turn 1 Malcolm is super heavily prioritized. It's a combo. It is a mana engine. It can be a card advantage engine with a number of other cards in the deck. Malcolm is a super important crux for this deck, and getting it out as soon as possible is just super important. So I won't speak to Rite of Flame and other lists that maybe are a little greedier, but for this one, you really get that immediate return with a card like Rite of Flame. You have
given me the Advil I need for the headache. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, there's so many times I've talked about this before where people talk about like Blue Farm, right? And, it's got great card advantage or card quality in it. And I'm like, Blue Farm claims some bad cards, some
for sure
disastrously bad cards to make its game plan work, which is okay. You're allowed to do that. And it's
synergy and card quality do not have to have correlation.
And it's one of those things where I've said this for a lot of times where in my deck building, I tend to be high card quality. The card quality is what I'm like basing most of my decisions on. I try to play cards that are good in a lot of different scenarios.
Mid-range play?
No. Gal, no, never.
What?
And so it's one of those cards that really grinds my gears because every time I see it, and I see it in like these like supposed mid-range decks with red, and I'm like, you're not playing a good mid-range strategy if you're playing this card because you're handicapping your card quality. I could go on a rant about it forever. The step through in your list, I'm assuming, is going to get Niv and also probably in some cases Spellseeker.
Yeah, I kind of forgot about Niv, to be honest. No, it's
there you go. There's a line in your deck.
Totally.
I can't remember to add Mental Misstep or Dranith, but I can tell you what your step through gets.
You give me a line in my deck, sure. No, I mean, when Spellseeker is a 1-card combo, being able to end step, go 2 mana, get my Spellseeker, untap, go for the win.
I mean, it's a tutor, right? Like that's the only
for sure,
real function the card serves.
5 mana bounce 2 things is insanely powerful. I don't know what you mean. But yeah, tutoring Niv is huge too.
The cycling too is really good in the fact that it's difficult to interact with because it's an activation. It's not a cast. So you can pull this off, do a tutor, and not have to worry about people, because I don't see Stifle. I don't see
nobody's playing Stifle.
Any of those effects. So it winds up being a very strong or a very dependable way of getting the thing that you want.
There's a lot of interesting things here where you guys have given me a lot of different like ideas to like munch on and like play around with. Yeah, that's a really good point.
And because of the way treasures work, right? And obviously I have a lot more pirates than your guys' lists, and also like separate pirates with evasion, that type of thing. And, you know, we're all playing Ketus, that type of stuff. Because of the way treasures work, they make mana of any color. So with Malcolm, and I was watching a video where someone was talking about their Malcolm Ketus list. They were talking about hard casting Niv all the time, which is in Niv Mizzet decks, ironically, harder than probably these decks here. Probably a lot harder, because the way Malcolm works, Malcolm is just a mana fixer for you, like really easily.
Magda too.
For sure. Magda too. Yes. I literally just goldfishing hands where I was like, I can accelerate out to a turn 1 Magda, and that fixes my hand for the rest of the game.
Well, this has been really interesting. Looking at these different cards, the reasons we picked them. It's also interesting to see the ways that we took the commander, right? Because the whole idea is we come into this and we go, okay, here's commander, build it. You can see the individual play styles in the way that we diverge, right?
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on and doing this with us, Ian. I know we're planning on doing some more of these with you here in the future.
I would love to. I'd love to be a part of that.
Always a pleasure to make content with you. And speaking of content, where can folks find you?
Yeah, so if you want to hear more of my hot takes, like cutting Red Blast and things like that, or you want to hear about the person who ruined the format by introducing Winota into it, you can go over to youtube.com/ComedIanMTG. Despite the name, I'm
not very funny. No, you're very
yeah,
funny.
there's a lot of breakdowns of the tournament grind of CEDH, deck techs on new exciting decks. We just finally released a comprehensive Winota deck tech that's covering all of that in the Mulligan guide. You can check down anytime there's a CEDH tournament with a reasonable following to it. I make a top 4 breakdown to those, break down the decks in them, why they have success in those tournaments. Most likely I was there. So I usually have some pretty good ground level experience in those tournaments. And then going over Mulligan guides, I have a series I do where I break down other people's gameplay and talk about, from a CEDH player who plays in tournaments, what I noticed during the gameplay, what, optimizations to be made and stuff like that. So a lot of series like that, a lot of varied content styles. Definitely got to get back on the ball with that series, but it's been busy few months.
It does happen. I understand. Well, thank you for joining us this week. Really is a pleasure, and we will look forward to more of these comedian times the Mind Sculptors brewing extravaganzas.
Very excited.
So with that about wraps things up for us today. Just a quick reminder that you can follow us on Twitter at SculptyBoys. BOIS is how you spell boys for that. Or you can find a direct link in our link tree in the description below. Want to also give an extra thanks to all of our patrons who help keep the lights on. If you too would like to become a patron, you can head on over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors, or you can just check out the link in the description. Thank you again for joining us, and from all of us here at the Mind Sculptors, I'm Callahan, and we'll see you next time.
I'm in line with the stars, I'm in sync with the earth. 10 toes deep, flower child from the turf. I never switch sides, like even when I die, I'ma ride for the squad, let up ties in the hearse. I've been on a vibe, kinda hard to describe. I'm in between, I'm good and it's fine, but I'm tired of the grind. Then I come alive in the night to realize I'm in the middle of the time of my life. I never so packed for the stack, never lied on the rap. Got a bag from the way that I write it. Queen looking Tyson, who that I survived doing 80 to the house. Then I hit it to the sky, changed haters on a tirade. Talking to their crib in the face, be still, let that hate stuff fade. We all want the same, we all want a meal in the safe. I wanna live like I'm trying to reach enlightenment. Trail spill from my lips, feel big from the bib. Take a sip till I pass out. Try and get grit, but it don't make sense. Cause you can lose life on this fast route. Yeah, turn thoughts to a cash cow. I might flip that to the glass house. I don't need the accolades, I'm in love with the chase. I just wanna eat, save a spot at the table. Beast with the slap, hit myself on the map. You long with the wind, but we knowing that it's cap. 5-hour flights, couple nights at the flat. To be real, couldn't see me making moves while I'm at. I'm still on the grind, limit time when I chat. I'm burning down sage, keep the demons away. When I write it, give a piece of myself to the page. I don't do it for the praise, love, that's just how I'm made.
Truth in the glass in the mirror.
Yeah.
Do it at me, old man, tryna pass in the fear. You're the first one to talk, but the last one to hear. Eyes blurry, but I couldn't see the ass in the